to Tesseract Talks, the place where we put the spotlight on tech trends. I'm your host, John K. Thompson, industry thought leader, innovator, professor, and author of 5 books on data analytics, AI, and including the path to AGI. I've been working in the tech industry for nearly 4 decades. I've worked at companies like IBM, EY, Dell, Gartner, and others. Today's conversation is going to focus on turning disorder into control in the AI environment. We will be talking about enterprise AI fragmentation, governance needs, and our guest is Nikunj Bajaj, CEO of TrueFoundry, and he'll help us understand why enterprises need a way to control their AI backplane. Nikunj, welcome to the show. How are you? Can you introduce yourself?
Thank you, John, for having me here. I'm excited to talk about how we are seeing shaping the enterprise world right now. Hi, everyone. I'm Nikunj, co-founder, CEO at TrueFoundry. My background is in machine learning. I used to be at Meta, where I led one of their conversational AI teams and also contributed to Meta's internal ML platforms as well. A lot of what we're building to the enterprises that we work with are learnings from the internal ML platforms at Meta. Excited to speak about it.
Fantastic. Glad to hear a little bit about your background and what you've done at Meta, which is always considered to be one of the leaders in the ML space. So let's jump into it. We're starting to see the expansion of domain language models or small language models, and that is causing some fragmentation and a little bit of chaos in the data pipelines and some of the systems around guardrails and more. So in your view, what do you see working right now, and what can we do to improve those areas of the AI environment?
Yeah, for sure, John. We are seeing agents are becoming much more powerful by the day. And by design of that, they're also becoming a lot more complex than what they used to be. No more, you can call an agent an LLM with a tool. In fact, we are seeing agents becoming a combination of 5 important components. These components are LLMs themselves, MCPs or model context protocol, which are like tools provided to the LLMs. Then you have guardrails, prompts, and other agents. We are seeing any high-level agent typically is comprised of other lower-level agents that come together to build the entire system. Now, the interesting thing that's happening with these 5 components building out the agents is there are also different teams within the enterprise that are building out the agents. And each of these teams want a slightly different variation or sometimes a completely different variation of any of these 5 components. And that's great because different teams can choose the tools that they want to use, but that also causes a tool sprawl within the enterprise. And from the lens of a central platform team whose job is to ensure a security and governance across these agentic applications that are getting developed, this is basically a nightmare, right? So what we are seeing enterprises need now is essentially a command center for all of these agentic applications that are getting built and also the underlying components within it.
I love that. When I was working at EY, we were building a number of agents and MCP and A to A, and those things were coming out, and we were looking at those, and we were using frameworks like Crew AI and AutoGen and others. And what we were finding was that while we were very excited about MCP and some of the other integration or control plane or control tower kind of concepts that were out there, really found that, if one team was using Crew and another team was using AutoGen or Semantic Kernel or one of the other 200 frameworks that are out there, the agents couldn't talk to them. They couldn't talk to each other. So, we'd have people working in finance that were starting out, and we have people working in audit that were starting out, and we were assuming that they were going to come together at some point, but then we realized that the technologies could not talk to each other. I think that's a real bottleneck and a problem. Do you see that as well?
For sure. Absolutely. In fact, one of the ways that I think about this is it's striking a balance between enabling these teams to be able to move really fast, but also ensuring that there is some level of consistency or at least a level of unification of how you are using these components and building out the agents. The dichotomy here that we're trying to solve between is federated execution with centralized governance. And I think that is basically becoming one of the biggest challenge within the enterprise. And maybe I'll instantiate this with an actual example. Think about one of these teams that are trying to use a model from AWS Bedrock and another team that's trying to use a Gemini, right, from Google Vertex. And both of these models have their own capabilities. However, from a central platform team's standpoint, now they need to create a standardized way of enforcing role-based access control. But the way Google enforces RBAC and the way AWS enforces RBAC are different. How do you ensure that they can have a budget control when the underlying FinOps layer of the two cloud providers are also different? How do they ensure guardrails across different models? And similarly, this problem just accentuates when you add all of these other 5 components that we talked about in building out the agents. Like in one way, you can think of this as a parallel between, say, if you think about an agent as a member of the workforce, right? Then all of these flexibility that you're providing to the agents are essentially the kind of creative liberties that you want to give to your team. For example, spend the way you deem fit, travel the way you deem fit, take leaves the way you deem fit, right? All of these flexibilities could be great when your team is small and has all the context of the business. But as your team starts becoming large, you need to start enforcing some policies as an enterprise, right? We think of what is missing in the agentic system is that headquarter that you have in the typical employment world. So that agent headquarter notion is the thing that I think is missing in the ecosystem, right?
I think that's so true. And you started out your remarks with one statement that I think is really salient and relevant. And I'll reiterate it just to make sure that people are getting it, is that what we're trying to have is federated execution with enough centralized control that it keeps things moving in the right direction and to make sure people don't get off the reservation or that agents don't, get out of control as well. So as AI operation, where do you see the operational bottlenecks from preventing enterprises from scaling safely, consistently, and cost effectively?
Yeah, for sure. Like the major challenge is that striking that balance between the agentic development speed and the overall governance aspect that we talked about, right? And that is one area where we think there is a notion of an AI gateway coming out as well. And that AI gateway is the one that is starting to act as this command center for all of the agentic development, right? Or think about the AI gateway acting as this agent headquarter notion that we talked about. How do you strike the balance between these two things? And maybe I will also spell this out a little bit more, because I think the notion of an AI gateway has been changing its definition in the last couple of years quite a bit. Like if you go all the way back to 2024, what people realized was the most important flexibility that they need was routing between different LLMs. And an AI gateway back then used to be this thin proxy layer that can send a request to an LLM1 or LLM2. In 2025, MCPs started to become more popular, and people are like, this gateway is also important to start becoming like a central entry point to all the MCP servers within the organization. And then AI gateway started to cover this LLM gateway and then also the MCP gateway concept. And as A to A protocol is becoming more popular, remember the point that you mentioned, agents built out in different frameworks don't have a way to talk to each other. Well, that's a problem that's getting solved with A to A protocol. And now people are thinking that, hey, agent gateway will also become part of this overall AI gateway. And as time passes, the definition has evolved to all the components that are needed to building out an agentic system, which are LLMs, MCPs, agents, guardrails, and prompts. That's what AI gateway is becoming as an entry point to. And once you have a unified entry point to all of these components, then it also ends up becoming the observability layer. And by design, it also starts becoming a command center as well, because then you can start enforcing organizational rules. For example, if I have traffic coming from my dev environment, I want to limit it to like 1,000 requests per day. Or if my request has any PII data, I want to make sure that I'm putting a PII redaction guardrail, assuming it's dealing with some sensitive PII data, right? So those are the kind of things where a bunch of operational bottlenecks exist today. And we believe that an AI gateway is starting to solve these bottlenecks for the enterprises.
I think that's a great way to start, but I think the gateway is also going to allow people to have a common federated platform for governance. You're going to allow people to look at compliance, look at regulations and rules and policies, and bring those to bear as well. You mentioned, in the dev environment, you want to limit the number of requests, but in some cases, you have young employees that are going to, maybe not even young employees, you're going to have employees they're going to kick off agentic workflows that could end up spending huge amounts of information. I personally have seen two employees independently and separate from each other, kicking off workflows that ran up bills of over $300,000. I think the gateway has some important control plane features in those areas as well. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, for sure. Like we have like completely agree with that. Like there's this one thing is sometimes people don't have context into the system that they're building and they end up overspending, like the example that you gave. In some other cases, people have context and they're trying to build out meaningful systems, but they don't have any easy way of figuring out how to strike a trade-off between this cost that we talked about, but also typically cost of these agentic system trades off with latency and accuracy. So how do you solve this triad of the problem, which is a trade-off between accuracy, latency, and cost? And that's one of the problems that we believe AI Gateway is solving quite nicely for the enterprises that we are working with.
Perfect. So from your perspective and that of TrueFoundry, I'm sure you've had some learnings from your customer deployments and some of the improvements that you've seen as enterprises are moving forward to try to reduce this fragmentation and come up with a unified architecture. Can you give us just a point or two on what you've seen in these areas?
For sure. I think when enterprises move from this fragmented stack to a unified architecture, the biggest value unlock that we have seen is teams getting a blueprint with which they can develop these agentic applications. It's almost like people have gotten a hang of how to build this thing out. I think the best I can do is actually give you a real example. So we were working with this Fortune 50 healthcare enterprise that actually launched a bold agentic application, which is patient facing. Like most organizations that we see are building out productivity applications which are internal facing. They ended up launching out this patient facing agentic IVR system. Now, they took about 6 to 9 months to build out the first version of ready to go live agentic application. But as they built it, they also developed an internal horizontal platform on top of which these agentic systems could be built and scaled up. The result of that was such that when other teams, after the launch of this agentic IVR, wanted to build their own generative AI applications, a lot of the problems that they would have needed to solve were already solved through this unified architecture, right? Access to LLMs, governance, observability, debugging capabilities, access to the latest flexible stack. All of these problems were already solved for. The result? Within 1 year from that, this enterprise had launched at least 10 applications, each of which generated at least $10 million in value from an agentic AI perspective. And that, I think, only happened because they created a framework or this unified architecture to be able to develop and ship and govern these agentic AI applications.
What a great start. I think that's really wonderful. And it's a way for people to understand that this is not just a technology that is a nice to have. This is going to be a strategic, functional, foundational component of the AI stack as we go forward. Many people have been talking about agents and agentic workflows and LLMs, and there's a fair amount of confusion of how all these components come together. And I think what you're talking about is that TrueFoundry is bringing that foundational glue, that organizational principle that's going to allow enterprises to put these systems into place in a controlled, systematic, standardized way. So as our final question and our final talking point, I wanted to ask you, as organizations move forward with more autonomous agent-driven systems, how do you see TrueFoundry evolving as a strategic player and layer in this AI stack?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually think of TrueFoundry as a strategic partner to the enterprises that we work with that participate with them in their entire journey of this agentic transformation. Like we think of ourselves helping these enterprises become agentic as opposed to build, let's say, a one-off agentic solution, right? And the reason we are seeing quite a bit of success with the enterprises that we are working with is primarily twofold. Number one, we have developed a platform that helps them keep their agentic stack future safe, which means that all the latest developments in the agentic world are available to them as they are ready to consume it because of our platform. but we transform all of these latest developments into the existing enterprise tech stack. And that is what makes it possible for them to even ship these applications, because otherwise that's a problem that you cannot solve for. Like, you have to sit within the enterprise stack, whether that is on private cloud or that is on their own data center or that is in an air-gapped environment. So that is one of the biggest reasons why we are getting a lot of traction with the enterprises. The second reason is we help enterprises avoid this false dichotomy of build versus buy. What's happening is a lot of our customers would take our platform and use it as is, but many of them choose to build a thin layer on top of our platform. So it's no more this build versus buy, rather it is build on top of something that you have bought. And because we're built using an API driven interface, that just makes it possible for enterprises to build on top of us, and thereby accelerating their agentic journey. So, like, if I really have to think about TrueFoundry as the strategic partner to enterprises, I think of it this way, that your agents need a lot of flexibility to act, but enterprises need a headquarters to control them. And TrueFoundry is becoming that agentic headquarter as a service, one enterprise at a time. That's how I think about TrueFoundry.
That's really great. That's probably one of the clearest explanations I've heard about agent coordination and orchestration and control in an enterprise context. So Nikunj, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for explaining TrueFoundry's value and your strategic positioning. So just to wrap it up, everybody, AI chaos is rooted in fragmentation. And we've seen a lot of fragmentation in large language models, domain language models, small language models. And that doesn't even get to the point of what we've been talking about is agentic agents and agentic workflows and those kind of things. So, as the market moves forward, we're going to see even more fragmentation, more offerings coming into the marketplace. Enterprises to scale require a unified enterprise-grade control plane. And that's what TrueFoundry is bringing to the marketplace. TrueFoundry helps organizations drive consistency, safety, and cost control. And it really sets the stage for building agentic systems that can be controlled and can be scaled and can be used in a compliant way that management and executives can feel good about their approach to agentic development. Well, it's been a great conversation, Nikunj. I hope that we can do it again soon. I really look forward to talking to you more about this. It's been great fun for me, at least. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, John, for having me. It's super, super nice to speak with you and talk about, all this agentic stuff within the enterprise. Thank you for having me here.
It was my pleasure. So just to wrap it up, everybody, wanted to thank you for tuning in. Thank you for streaming and listening over time. And, these are really leading edge insights that you're hearing on Tesseract Talks. And that's what we really focus on here, is the leading edge trends and where technology is going. And if you're interested, please reach out to the TrueFoundry team, number one, to learn more about their offerings and how they can be a strategic partner for you in your agentic development. But also, for me personally, TrueFoundry has purchased a number of the Path to AGI, and I've signed those books. And if you inquire about that through the contact information, they'll send you one of those signed copies. So again, thanks for tuning in and look forward to seeing you and hearing from you next time. Take care. Goodbye.